Hello, I'm Cherry Leroy and I work at Clapper as the Engagement and Services Manager. Thanks for tuning in to our latest Q&A session, which is all about the Slumbrs II project study. The Slumbrs II study aims to answer the question, should babies with a cleft palate sleep on their back or side? I'd like to welcome Professor Ian Bruce, who's going to tell us a little bit more about the study. Welcome, Ian, and thanks for joining us today. Ian, could you tell us what is the Slumbrs II project?
Yeah, hello, everybody. So Slumbrs II project is looking at babies born with an isolated cleft palate and trying to answer the question, what is the best way for those children to be put to sleep? What position is the best place for them? Should it be back lying or should they be side lying?
Can you tell us what inspired the study?
Yeah, this study was very much driven by the opinions and experiences and feedback that we received from specialist cleft palate nurses throughout the UK, because there's a difference, and it depends where you're born as to what advice you receive. So roughly speaking, at the time when we did the original preparation work, half of the cleft centres and networks in the UK would say sleep your infant, your baby on its back. And the other half would say that the baby should be put on their side in order to sleep. The driver for that difference was the experiences of nurses where they felt that some children seemed to sleep better if they were in a side position than on their back.
And why is the sleep position important?
Well, the primary problem that you can encounter if you're not in your correct sleep position is that when we're asleep, we've got to think we all go floppy, like a puppet in effect. So all of our throat and airway has a tendency to collapse down when we're asleep. And if it does that to a significant extent, then the normal cycle of breathing in and out is interrupted temporarily. So there can be underbreathing, what we call a hypopnea, or an apnea, where you're actually breath holding for a period of time. And the consequences of that is that the oxygen levels in your blood can go down, and the waste gas, the carbon dioxide levels in your blood can go up. And we know that if that carries on for a significant period of time, or those drops in the oxygen level, what we call desaturations, are significant, that can affect child development. So really what we're trying to do is make sure that this isn't another barrier to development that these children with cleft palate and their families have to face.
And can you tell us a little bit about the people who are involved in the study?
Oh yeah, we've got the A team of researchers and clinicians involved in this project. If you want to look at individual bios, so a picky and a description, then if you go to the Clapper website, that you can read them about individuals. But what we have assembled is we've got respiratory pediatricians. So we've got chest experts to help us to analyze the data and to then, when we've got that data analyzed, to really interpret it in the right way, because we don't want to misinterpret our findings. So we've got respiratory pediatricians. We've got ENT surgeons such as myself. We've got clinical nurse specialists. And again, I cannot emphasize it enough, this project would not be happening if it wasn't for the support of clinical nurse specialists from the cleft networks throughout the UK. And so we've got two specialist nurses on our core investigative team again to give us those perspectives, which are all important. We have got community paediatricians and public health experts, so they can help us to make sure that our findings are put in the context of the greater and wider population throughout the UK and different groups within the UK. And also we've got trialists. So we've got really experienced clinical researchers that have managed really big trials in the past to make sure that our methods are right. Because what we don't want to do, we've had all of this support from clinical nurse specialists, we've had all the support from the parents in the preparatory study, what's called a feasibility study, before Slumbrs 2, i.e. Slumbrs 1. We don't want to waste all of that effort.
Okay, so you've got a lot of people involved, and as you've mentioned, Clapper are involved in helping communicate information about the study to parents, and hence why we're doing this Q&A today. We will also have a dedicated section within our website where people can find out more information, and a copy of this video will also be available there so people can refer back to it. So tell me, what did you decide to run this? Why did you decide to run the study this way?
Again, we did a feasibility study, so almost like a test study to see what was the best way to answer this question and what was a study design that was acceptable to parents. Because there is no point as designing a trial that we're all very proud of, and then we find out that it's not something that parents of infants with a cleft palate would find acceptable. So we have done lots of preparatory work. It's probably over about 5 years in order to get to the point that we're at now, where we feel that we've got a methodology that will answer the clinical question, and we feel that the clinical question is important. Parents, through Clapper and through our feasibility study, have confirmed for us that this question is important, and so we're just raring to go.
Okay, so you mentioned that an oximeter is a machine which can measure the amount of oxygen in your blood, and you're going to talk a little bit about that later on. But just so that you know that you don't get put off, an oximeter is a little device that just clicks on the end of your finger. Is that right? Yes,
it is. It's an oximeter. If you've been in hospital, you will see oximeters throughout the wards, in the anaesthetic rooms, and they're also used in theatres as well as a standard way to measure the amount of oxygen in any person's bloodstream. And the difference being, it's not the machine that measures it, the difference is the size of the sensor, which can go on your finger or on a toe. And as we talked about, so if we think about what's happening to our airway, we're going to sleep, we relax a little bit. We know that if you're a person that is born with a cleft palate, your airway around the mid part of your head is already a little bit narrower. So it's a little bit narrower. And then if we then have you sleeping in probably not the best sleep position, then that might mean that your tongue falls back a little bit in your mouth and into your throat, so airway gets smaller again. And then we get into this cycle of interrupting that normal flow of oxygen in and out of via your mouth to your lungs, and there are negative consequences for the resultant changes in your oxygen levels. So what would classically happen is that these infants might be snoring, and we don't think snoring on its own is bad. But if the snoring, if you like, gets worse, so the snoring is coming because of that collapse and the obstruction, if it crosses a point, then that's where the airflow is really significantly changed, And that's when we see the changes in oxygen levels. And it's that group of infants that we're most interested in. And the other thing to say is that this isn't a problem, this sleep apnea, the breath holding during sleep. This isn't something that is specific to children with cleft palate. All children can have sleep apnea. It's just there are some particular problems that people with a cleft palate will encounter that others would not. So their risk of a problem is raised.
Thank you. So there was another slumbers study a few years ago, which you've mentioned, and what's different about this one?
Okay, so the last study, we measured oxygen levels, but also the funders, the National Institute for Health Research, which is the biggest funder of NHS research, they asked us to also measure the levels of the waste gas. So oxygen, obviously that's key for all of our bodies and our cells to work normally. And they wanted us to measure carbon dioxide levels as well. And we did that with a tube that ran underneath the nose, and it sampled the air that was being breathed in and out to look at what was called the end tidal carbon dioxide. So the carbon dioxide levels at the end of a breath. Now, when we did the feasibility study, parents were very clear to us that they felt that was very disruptive to their child's sleep. So it was creating an artificial environment, if you like, because we don't want this to be any different than another night that infant is asleep. But parents were very clear that it was disturbing their sleep, and they found it very difficult to use. And so that's the change, really. In a way, if I was trying to sell this study to anybody who's thinking about it, it's easier than last time.
Thank you. And who is eligible to take part in the study?
You have to be a baby with a isolated cleft palate, born at term. So it wouldn't be right to include babies that were born prematurely, because they can have problems with their lungs for different reasons. You can't have problems with your heart, because again, if we think about what our heart is doing, it is pumping blood around our body and to our lungs so we can get oxygen into the body and the waste gas is out. So if you have a problem with your heart, that's going to complicate things. And likewise, we're not looking for children who might have a disturbed sleep for another reason, such as having a tube down into their stomach to give them feeds, because that can lead to some reflux, heartburn, which can affect the quality of your sleep. And also children who very early on, because we're going to be looking to check oxygen levels around 1 month after birth. But some children already have had to be in hospital to have an airway, what we call an adjunct, something put into the airway to make it better. So that might be a tube from the nose to the base of the tongue. So we talked before, didn't we, about the tongue perhaps falling back, where you put the tip of the tube past it so it doesn't, or a hole in the neck, which is inserted surgically, and a tube put in to breathe through your neck. That's called a tracheostomy. Or you can have a tube, less commonly, via the mouth, again to the base of the tongue to help you breathe. So those sort of things would complicate the study, and they would potentially prevent us from finding the right answer. So what we're looking at is the baby that was born with an isolated cleft palate, who is otherwise developing as we think they ought to, and not requiring any additional support.
And how many babies are you hoping to recruit for the study?
So our preparatory study helped us, and another group of people, which, oh crumbs, I forgot to mention earlier on in our A team. So they're not the B team, they're still the A team. We have methodologists and statisticians, and what is called a clinical trials unit, again, to help us deal with all the data in a very, very safe and rigorous and scientific way. So we work with these two groups of people to make sure that we got the numbers right. So that, because there's no point recruiting X number of babies to the study, as if when we do all the calculations, we work out, oh, there wasn't really enough to be able to say with confidence. So we need 244 in babies, and they will be randomly allocated to either backlying or side-lying. Now, this is a really interesting point. So you might, as a parent, you might agree to be involved in this study, and your network, let's just say it's Manchester network, and as standard, they tell you that we think that your baby should be put to sleep in a side position, because we think that there is less of that airway collapse and the tongue rolling back than when you're on your back. Now, you might join the study and be allocated to a sideline position, in which case, for the 2 days and 1 night that you're in this study, or 2 day, well, as standard, it should be 2 days and 1 night, but there is the potential to increase it to a second night if there were some problems with the measurements. So that particular family might not put their baby to bed in a different way than normal. But equally, they could have been randomly assigned to say, for the day that you're in the study, not all the other times, but for the day you're in the study, you put your child to sleep on their back. But it's really important here is that, coming back to what I said earlier, it's in terms of risk, because of course we shouldn't put anybody at any risk in order to answer a research question. But this is comparing two things that are already done. So if you were born somewhere else, let's just say not Manchester, the standard advice would be to put your baby to sleep on their back. So it's not as if something's an experimental way to put children to sleep. We're trying to work out, of these two sleep positions, which are used as standard in the UK, which is better.
Okay. And if circumstances meant that a certain family weren't eligible, is there a way that they can help in any other way with the study?
Well, yes, because through Clapper, and Clapper's a great way for parents to communicate with each other and to communicate with experts, that they can tell other parents about the study, but also across their childhood, they're bound to speak to other parents that perhaps might be expecting a baby that has the possibility of a cleft, for example, or they might be asked by a friend or Clapper to talk to a new set of parents or parents. And so it is really important that everybody knows about the study. And that word is, in research sort of language, is dissemination. There's no point us answering this question if we keep the answer to ourselves and don't tell anybody about it. And the best way to get the message out is via Clapper and those people with lived experience.
Okay, so if I was a parent that wanted to take part, what would I need to do?
I say it's dead simple, but I hope it is. And that is, if you go to the Clapper website, there is a web page for this study, and that has links that really should hopefully make it very easy for a parent to get involved.
Okay, so could you give us a bit of a talk through about what the level of involvement would be?
Yeah, so what will happen, let's just say that a parent says, I'm interested in being involved in this study, and it will be their specialist cleft palate nurses that will tell them about the study, and then and perhaps they might actually find out about it via Clapper. But those are really likely to be the two groups or people that they're going to find out about it. And if they're interested, then we have a set of information sheets called patient information sheets that tell you more about the study, and they'll give you information about, well, oh, actually, this is really of interest to me. I do want to get involved. And then it'll tell you what to do next. Because it is also important to state that this study has had approval from the ethics committee. So what that means is they feel that the question's important, how we're doing it is safe and ethically sound, and the information that we provide to parents is accessible and has enough detail for them to make the decision, because it's their decision whether they want their baby to be included or not.
Thank you. Is it dangerous to change a baby's sleeping position?
Coming back to my earlier description of the two sleep positions, we don't think it would be dangerous to change between the two, because they're both safe. It's just which is better of the two. And the other important thing to say is that we can only compare the sleep positions early in a baby's life, because by the time the baby gets to 5-6 months, anybody that's seen a child sleep will know that they do gymnastics in bed and they're rolling around themselves. So actually, later on in life, children will themselves be changing their position between back lying and side lying, for example. So no, we don't think that actually changing your sleep position from what it was the day before would pose a significant risk, because babies are being changed in terms of their sleep position as part of routine practice. And last thing on that is that those centres or networks in the UK that advise parents to put their baby to sleep on their back, if they have a child that seems to be working harder to breathe when they're asleep and has very disturbed sleep, perhaps that breath holding with snoring, signs of sleep apnea, the first thing that they will do is recommend to sleep on the side. And so I really don't think that there is an issue from that perspective. Perhaps another thing I should have said was, what's all this, what's it about? Why does it matter how you put your infant to sleep? Well, you may be familiar with the Back to Sleep campaign from the Department of Health, and that's some years ago now, but it remains a standard of advice. And that was because of some children were unfortunately dying of cot death, mainly associated with sleeping on their front. The government came up with some guidelines saying that the standard position for babies to sleep in is on their back. And so that's really why half the centres say, well, we just want to stick with that advice. But if the child looks to be working harder and having more disturbed sleep, then we'll move them on the side. And then the other group of cleft networks saying, well, we know that on the side works if we see any problems with sleep, aren't we just better doing that for all the children? So that Back to Sleep campaign really was about children that didn't have any other health issues to contend with. And that's why we arrive at this situation where there's a difference in advice.
So sometimes we hear from families that their health visitor has told them to put their baby to sleep on their back, and they might be worried that by changing their baby's position, they're going to get into trouble with their health visitor.
And again, that comes down to information and communication. So the health visitor will be communicating with the specialist cleft nurse, and we'll have information that will be given to the parents that can be explained to or given to the health visitor. And health visitors are aware and will be aware of children with other medical problems that have been involved in studies. So they'll know that research happens in all age groups across childhood.
Thank you. When do you expect to have the results of the study?
Hopefully, the results of the study should be available somewhere between 3 and 4 years after starting, and we are just about to start.
Okay, and what happens after you've got the results?
Then, once we've got the results, we'll be sitting down as a research team. We'll be sitting down with parent representatives via Clapper and Clapper professionals to interpret the results that we find, and then decide what's the best way to get the message out. Because we could find one is not better than the other. Backlying is still better, or side-lying is the better of the two. The preparatory study, the feasibility study that we did, suggested there might be some benefit from the sideline position, because we know in other children that don't have a cleft palate, if they have a problem with their airway, putting them on the side seems to help. So we got a clue that there might be a difference, but not to the extent, because the feasibility study was not designed to answer the question, because we need much more data and we need more infants to be involved.
Okay, and can you just remind us again how parents will find out about the study?
Yeah, you can go to our Slumbrs II webpage on the Clapper website, and that will give you all the information that you need, and it will also give the contact details for the research team. That's
great, thanks, Ian. That's really, really helpful. We'll post the link to our hub in the comments, and if you're watching on Facebook or watching the video from our website, then we hope that means you've already found our hub. But we'll make sure that there needs to be lots more links so that everybody finds out the information. It's been really informative. There's a few questions we've had through from Facebook. One of them, several families have come forward saying that they've never been advised by their cleft team on how to sleep their baby. So I don't know if you're able to comment on that at all.
Obviously I can't answer that. They'd have to speak to their network. But as I say, we've published the findings in a medical journal. When we went and specifically asked all the networks what they advise, then we got a split 50-50. So we did ask that question. So they all, because what we wanted to do is we wanted to know what's their standard advice.
Thank you. And I think this family might have missed the answer to this question. So if you wouldn't mind repeating it, and what age baby do you need to be part of the study?
So the baby, the family need to be recruited in the first month of life, and the testing happens around 1 month of age.
Thank you. And this is a question from a family of an older child. Do cleft palate children often have difficulty sleeping? I sometimes feel my 4-year-old wakens up due to breathing issues. He has a cleft lip and palate repair. Should I get this investigated? He's never managed a full night's sleep.
Yes is the answer. This, well, yeah, full stop, yes. Because you can have sleep apnea across childhood. And actually, if we looked across the population, the sort of peak ages to have snoring with breath holding that interrupts the respiratory cycle, that sleep apnea, is probably between the ages of about 2.5 and 5.5. So that particular child is within that range where actually we see more of it. We're tackling infants first, but that we're going to ask the same questions in future studies about infants around the time of cleft palate repair, or older infants or young children. Now, but the problems will be different in so much as you would need to have a positioning pillow if the child was 6 months of age or 7 months of age, because they'll naturally be wanting to roll over. If you've got a child age 4, then that child might have large adenoids and tonsil, that lymphoid tissue that we find at the back of our mouth and the back of our nose. Now, that has a particular problem in a child that's had a cleft palate repair, because you really need to have a good working relationship between the ENT doctors that might consider removing the tonsils, for example, and your regional cleft palate service, because we don't want to do something like remove the tonsils and then affect the success of the repair. So that's, again, one of these things that the NHS really, we do well, but we could always do better. We need to communicate between teams so that we're all on the same page.
Thank you. And I'd just like to say thank you to all the parents out there that are sharing their experience of their baby sleep with each other, because it's very useful for people to find that out. And yeah, the link to the Slumbrs 2 page on the website is going to be posted in the chat. So thank you very much, Ian, for giving us your time for this Q&A. It's been really,
thank you for the opportunity.
And yeah, thanks very much.
All the best, everybody.
Bye.